The Whiskey Network is very proud to welcome Kyle Shutt today. We're going to delve into a lot of subjects. Welcome, Kyle. Thanks for joining us.
No, thank you for having me.
I have Jimmy Z here with me as well. Kyle, we're going to put you through the paces today, and we're going to have a lot of fun talking about whiskey, talking about music, and talking about whatever else comes up.
Sounds great.
Let's get started. So we know you from acts like The Sword, Doom Side of the Moon, The Dirty Restaurant of Death as well. That's the latest one that's coming out. If people haven't seen that, go and look it up, because I think that's one of the best album covers I've seen in probably 10 years.
Slightly on the immature side, but my daughter and I started a band. She's 3.5. She's almost 4 now. But when we started the band, she was 3.5, and I was like, "What do you want to call the band, baby?" And she just goes, "Dirty Restaurant of Death." I was like, "Oh shit, okay."
Whatever baby wants, baby gets, right?
Exactly. Her artistic vision would not be compromised.
Perfect. And then you also have a solo record that's out as well.
Yeah, that, and I keep cranking out the cover tunes and just doing all kinds of silly paintings and stuff, just whatever it takes to get through this pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So Jimmy, I know you had a question.
So here's my first question to you, Kyle, is to the uninitiated, what is doom metal to you? Well, how would you define that?
Doom, I mean, if you want
no idea what it is.
Yeah, okay, so it can be sort of like an elitist thing. It's since become a more general term, but I mean, straight up doom metal, back in the day, I mean, in the late 90s, early 2000s, there's a very specific subgenre of an already pretty obscure genre of music. It's got to be as slow as humanly possible while still maintaining a groove. And the lyrics are typically about the end of the world, the end of society, destruction and death, mayhem, things like that. It since has kind of just been applied to anything that's not mainstream, like mall metal. It's doom metal, doom. I swear, it's like so many. When I grew up, there was like 2 doom bands. There was Burning Witch, and you couldn't even call sleep doom, even though that they get labeled like a lot of doom these days. A lot of what the subgenres of metal, like death metal, doom metal, things like that, it all has to do with the lyrical content. So when you talk about like stoner metal, like The Sword got the stoner metal claim a lot, which we never sang about weed. That's the thing, is like it's all these genres and everything had kind of been blurred and forgotten and just misused over the years, to the point where it doesn't even matter anymore. You can't even, but even though it doesn't matter, you can't say that you're just a rock band, because they're like, "No, well, what kind of rock are you?" It's like, "Well, we're like prog rock." Like, "No, but they're like stoner metal." It's like, "But we don't sing about weed, and we're not even really that metal." I don't know, I mean, so people love to put things in tiny little boxes, and if the box is too big, they don't really like to think of think for themselves. They like to be told what to think, as crass as that sounds, but it's true.
I get it.
I think the prog label fits The Sword perfectly. I mean, there's a lot of labels that you could put on The Sword, but prog is very appropriate.
Yeah, we got every name thrown at it, like retro or whatever, but yeah, we just, I don't know, I always felt like we were just a rock and roll band, and we got the Sabbath thing a lot, and I get why, but I always felt like we had a lot more in common with bands like Rush or Thin Lizzy or Yes, where we might not have been as complicated as some of those prog bands, but we were definitely like thinking person's music. It wasn't just
absolutely
just low and slow for no reason.
Have you ever heard of like Fate's Warning and stuff like it?
Mm-hmm.
A little bit of that. I even, like, God, it was like rockabilly, some of it, later on, maybe a little bit.
Kind of, yeah.
I mean, you guys experiment a lot. Like, I always listen to Warp Riders, right?
Uh-huh.
And then compare it to something more recent, like the Use Future stuff or whatever. Mm-hmm. Very, very different. And you guys take a hell of a lot of risks. So to just classify you as, say, doom metal, that's what we are. I don't think that's really what you are. I think you definitely are artists that push the envelope in whatever you're trying to accomplish on that particular record.
Yeah, exactly. We always tried to make just a really great record. Like, we tried to make the records that we wanted to hear. We never consciously set out to create some doom sound,
something specific,
or something like that. Yeah, but even I would say our first album is close to a doom kind of sound as you're going to get. But even then, we had elements of like thrash, elements of
Sure.
death metal and stuff like that, all in that record. And it was kind of just like a all-in-one kind of sounding band. We just got the doom label thrown at us a lot, which I mean, we sound nothing like Candlemass or Burning Witch or any actual doom bands, you know. But whatever. What at the end of the day, whatever helps people get into it. You know, if somebody's into doom metal and they say that the Sword is somebody else says the Sword is doom metal, and so that person goes and listens to it, they're gonna say, well, this isn't doom metal, but I do like it. So, you know, whatever gets people talking, I'm not gonna hate on anything that, you know, that, yeah. Let's
just call it your part Rush, part ZZ Top, part Queensryche, part Metallica. Is that all? Is that good?
We were in, I guess, yeah. Well, since it's funny because I grew up in a real small town in Texas that the only two bands that came through on the reg were Pantera and ZZ Top. And so if you think of it, the Sword does kind of fall like right in between Pantera and ZZ Top. Like
I'm willing to roll with it. Perfect.
You know? It's somewhere between those two things.
All right. So you know, look, our audience is really dying to know, and we'll dive right into it. You know, let's talk about your relationship with whiskey. You're an enthusiast. Your conversations with me, it came out right away that you're into it. You threw some names out. You know, rock and roll and whiskey are synonymous with one another.
Are you back? Lost you for a second. Sorry.
Nope. You back?
Yeah, I got you.
Boop, boop, there you are. I am. I can hear you, but you're kind of grainy. Sorry about that. It's the nature of these things.
Okay, no problem. So rock and roll and whiskey, long history there. We're very happy that you're a whiskey enthusiast. Take me through your whiskey history. What bottles or brands do you favor? And, you know, tell me a little bit about how your tastes may have evolved over time.
Yeah, well, I think my taste evolved just as the knowledge was accrued over the years. Especially, I'm going to say, like when I turned 21 in 2004, but I started drinking when I was, I don't know, 15. So, not that it's a contest, but you know, when you're that young, you just kind of drink whatever you can get your hands on. And I wasn't really a big whiskey fan because the only whiskeys I could get a hold of were not the tastiest in the world. But I want to say, I think I had a Bullet bourbon would have been the first whiskey that I tasted that I was like, oh, this is nice. I could just drink this without having to mix it with something, you know. And then also just drink a lot of beer on stage. You're gonna have to pee like halfway through your set, which is not that big a deal if you have a 30-minute set, but if you have like an hour and a half set, yeah, it's a little nicer just to sip on some whiskey. I drank a lot of tequila for a long time too, but it wasn't until I can't remember exactly what year, but eventually it was just kind of, the group decided to just get a bottle of Makers or Woodford or Knob Creek or something on the rider. Stuff that's real easy to get, you know, so you can have some kind of consistency. Although I wouldn't say that those are necessarily my go-tos to sip on. Our singer's a big bourbon guy, which I'm not opposed to, but I like a real nice single malt whiskey a lot better. The Stranahan's is one of my favorites. That's probably the first bottle that I ever got. It was gifted to me by a friend of mine, Matt Kogel from Colorado, who he gave me a bottle of it back when they used to actually write down the music that they were listening to when they were doing the bottling on the bottles. I think they've since stopped doing that. I think their production level is a little bit higher. The amount that they're putting out, they can't really take the time to write out every single label anymore. But it was cool to have a couple of those old bottles and sip on those. I love Old Rippy if I'm going to be sipping. That was they come in the 375 mil bottles, but they cost just as much as the 750.
Yes, they do.
It was very nice.
Yeah.
There was one time on tour when I had our dressing room got broken into in Baton Rouge, and my wallet was stolen. I had like hundreds of dollars in cash in there. Everything was gone, and basically the security camera that was pointing toward the door to the backstage area was magically not working that night. And so whenever whenever the promoter came in and like told me that, I kind of lost my shit. And I did the whole thing in the movies where you pick them up and hold them against the wall and say, "You're gonna give me $800 right now, or shit is gonna not be cool." And I felt really, really bad about that. And because as much as mad as I was, it was totally not his fault. I should not have put my hands on him. That was really, really messed up. So the next time we played Baton Rouge, we were fortunate enough that he actually bought another show. He did give me $800, by the way. I think because he knew I was going to cause way more than $800 worth of damage to that bar if he didn't. But to say I was sorry for putting my hands on him like that, I bought him a bottle of 15-year Redbreast. And brought it to the show, and we had a good old time hashing it out and sipping over that one. So I do love whiskey. It doesn't all have to be super fancy though. There are plenty of lower price points that are fine to sip on. Like Woodford Reserve is great. Evan Williams, good old fashioned table bourbon. There's nothing more fun than when you're sometimes you have to, well, back in the day before the coronavirus, you would play these festivals and tens and thousands of people would join together, and you would always end up having to do these press junkets backstage that you'd have like 10 interviews in a row, and you're just kind of getting shuffled between them, this and that. And some interviewers, it's kind of like on camera, and maybe the interviewer isn't as experienced as some of the other ones, and it can seem like it kind of goes on a little bit longer than you were hoping, or like the interview's kind of awkward. But then some interviewers have a bottle of bourbon on the table. And it's just, I was like, see, y'all, this is the ticket. You just like put a couple shots in me halfway through, it's like 3 p.m. I'm trying to get show drunk. You know what I mean? It always results in a much better interview.
Hey, I hope we're starting out okay and doing right by you in this interview.
You didn't send me a bottle. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. I couldn't. I kid.
Well, so there's a lot to unpack there.
Those are some of my favorite brands. Yep.
Yeah,
right.
No, I love the fact that you're into a spectrum of beverages, and I also like the fact that you kind of jump around and go to a bunch of different ones. That's awesome. I think that's great. And we interviewed someone just recently, and we had a conversation about there's social whiskey, and then there's solitary whiskey, right? There's the stuff that you're just at home and you're just sipping on something, or you're doing something that's social. You also touched on a road story, an interesting road story. So I want to ask a question. You've been on the road for a lot of years. You've played a lot of shows. There has to be at least one really off the charts, crazy cool road story that you have that involves whiskey.
That we already. Oh yeah. Well, this was what year would this have been? This would have been 2015. I think it was the first night of tour. Might be mistaken. It might first or second night, but we had. I'm pretty sure it was the first night because we played New Orleans, which is a city notorious for just getting way too drunk in.
Just a little out of control.
We played this club called just a little bit. We played this club called Gaza Gaza, which is in the Garden District. We had only ever played the Quarter before, and so this was the first time that we played outside the Quarter. And that little area has really come up since then. But back in those days, this would have been about 5 years ago, maybe. It was still on its way up. It was still a little rough in that neighborhood. And the club that we played, had just opened. I want to say it was like the first month that it was open, and had a very small stage. Usually when we play New Orleans, we'll play like the 500, 600 seater club, kind of like that, and usually sell it out, and it's always a good time. But this place held about 150 people, and it was just kind of one of those things where we were on our way to do a much bigger tour, and so we're under a radius clause thing that we can't play a club over a certain capacity and this and that. So we're playing this really tiny club with this really tiny stage, and our gear basically just barely fit on the stage, and there was no extra. I usually put my road case on the side of my amp to use as a drink stand, but this time there was no drink stand, so I just had my glass of whiskey sitting on top of my amp, which is a no. You really shouldn't do that, but I thought, what's the worst that could happen? Well, we were a really loud band, and the bass frequency must have just shaken that glass of whiskey, just like vibrated it over, and it dumped down the work grill. I guess the top of my amp is where the grill was, so like let the heat out and everything, and then a whole glass of whiskey just poured right down in my amp and exploded all the tubes. and just smoke billowing out of it. I mean, it was pretty wild. I had a spare amp, it wasn't that big a deal, but it was just like, oh no, what's going on? And and fortunately, I don't like to mix my whiskey because if you spill Coca-Cola or anything like that inside of your amp, and it cooks immediately once it touches the transformers and all that stuff, it's impossible to clean that off. All that sugar and everything, it's really nasty. But it just being the whiskey itself, it literally vaporized instantly. There was nothing to clean. My amp was, I guess, running really hot that day. And but there's nothing. I had never seen that much glass just shattered inside of an amp before. It was crazy. That amp's still kicking too. I love that amp. It might have made it sound better.
I was just gonna ask you, did the amp survive?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
It's better now.
I think it does.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Do the stories change? Because I know you've been on tour with some bigger bands, Metallica. You were supposed to be on tour this summer with Primus.
I know, we were getting the band back together, man. We were honestly right now we were supposed to have been back from all that touring. It was supposed to have been like in the past by now. It's just still crazy that it's been rescheduled and we still haven't even left home to do it yet. But yeah.
So do the antics change when the bands are bigger, or is it still kind of the same, whether it's a small club or a big arena? The shenanigans with whiskey are the same.
It doesn't matter. It's every tour is different. Every band is different. There's not really any rules to it. That's why I like the music industry so much, is just because it's kind of like the Wild West. You never know where you're gonna have. I will, just to speak on like certain stereotypes, I guess, of like, you think that in LA, LA has such a reputation for being like this party city, and so much crazy stuff has happened there with all these bands and stuff like that. I've never really had a good time in LA. Like, I don't know. It's just like, it takes forever to get anywhere. You're really busy until the show's over. Last call there is like a little bit earlier than most places, and so like even when the show is over, there's nowhere to go party, and you just end up back at the hotel going to bed early, and then you're
Kyle,
I don't know. I've never.
You're breaking my heart right now.
I know.
You're breaking my heart, sir.
But I will say that, like, for every lackluster New York City or Los Angeles kind of experience that you have, you'll be in Boise, Idaho, and just burn the house down. You know what I mean? And just like drink like 2 bottles and just go nuts. It's funny, like the crazy parties happen in the most unlikely places, and that's sort of part of the adventure of it, I think, is because you never know when you're gonna have a raging party. Although it is guaranteed when you play the Bourbon Theater in Lincoln, Nebraska, you're probably gonna have a good time.
I gotta write that down. Go to see a show
that bar a couple of times. Yeah, there's some crazy nights in there. But yeah, the Midwest is always a lot of fun. Indianapolis, you can always get into a lot of trouble there. But yeah, sometimes the big cities, they got such a reputation that it's hard to have like that crazy good time. Go ahead, sorry.
Well, what about Florida? Jimmy's from Florida.
Oh God, I love Florida. Yeah, I'm actually going to be headed there pretty soon.
Cool.
I'm very excited. I'm a beer enthusiast too. There's a lot of great breweries out of Florida, but we don't know. I want to check out Vera Beach. I've got some friends from there. I'm going to check that out. Maybe St. Augustine. Yeah. I got some friends in Tampa. Might pop down there for a minute. I don't know. I live in a 30-foot Airstream travel trailer, so I can kind of just go wherever. I know it's kind of, people are rolling their eyes at people traveling during a pandemic right now, but
Tool actually played in our little small arena here in Fort Myers back. I think it was during Laterals. They're like, because Tool's a little bit out there. They're like, oh, let's just pick some place in the middle of nowhere and go play. So Fort Myers is where I live, which is like 100 miles south of Tampa, and it's sort of like that. It's a very conservative area, but man. I'll tell you, there's a lot of rocking that goes on there. So,
we never had a bad show in Florida. I mean, really, it took a lot of people complain that we never made it there that often. So maybe the fact that we only made it there every couple of years made the shows better, but we never had a bad show in Florida.
So something that's interesting is there's a lot of bands that are suddenly putting their mark on whiskey bottles. Motorhead, Metallica, Slipknot's got a whiskey that's out there. What do you think about that? You think you think that there's some true love of whiskey, or you think it's marketing?
I don't know. I will say that the Sword kind of we were one of the first bands to start branding alcoholic beverages. We weren't the first by any means, but we were the first of our ilk, I think, to start doing that. Us and Mastodon made some beers,
It was
and
the beer,
I
yep.
swear the next like festival season, Iron Maiden, Motorhead, everybody was just like, "Oh, bands do beers now. Well, we'll do a beer. We'll be bigger than everything." And then so that just kind of naturally branches out to everything. Like the Sword did a BMX bike one time. And then like a month later, like Slayer, check out Slayer's BMX bike. I was like, I just knew people were watching us trying to like ape our merchandising prowess. But that's fine.
I
It's
didn't
a
win the
natural
bike, but I
consequence
tried.
of the music industry. It's okay. It's okay. It was a contest.
Yes, it was.
But it's a natural consequence of the music industry kind of like tanking right now, and everybody's just like trying to branch out and like see what they can sell to make some extra cash. I mean, I almost opened a bar before this pandemic started. I was scouting locations in February. We had investors ready to cut checks, and in a way, I'm glad that it didn't work out because I would have wasted $250,000 of somebody else's money. But hey, that's fine. That's I don't know. I might still do that again one day, but certainly not now. I just got to the point where I was like drinking a beer, and I said, I can't sell one record anymore, but people cannot stop buying these fucking things, and so it was just I should just start selling beers. Why not? But so I get that. I don't knock any band for selling anything. There are certain things that I would never sell just because I don't need that money or whatever, like and not that I don't need money, I just mean like it's just some things that I have standards about. But sell what you're gonna sell. If it's part of your band's image and there's fans that want to buy it, make the thing,
Yeah.
put it out, man. I don't like to hate on people for living their lives and doing what they got to do to survive.
Yeah,
And
I agree.
If making your own whiskey is part of like surviving, then that's just sounds like a win-win to me, man.
And if it moves bottles, that's perfect. That's what it's all about. Like you say,
I will say though that the only issue I would take though is if you just like put it on some swill. Like I don't want to say the massive band that made their own beer, but there's this massive band from the UK that made their own beer, and I know for a fact it was just Carling with a different label on it. And so if you're gonna make something, at least take an interest in it and make it a good product that has some soul in it, and that does have the essence of your band in it, at least on some level.
Yeah, I would have a problem if the band didn't drink whiskey and they are trying to sell a whiskey. That would be a problem for me.
Yeah.
I think for you too. I mean, it would be like trying to sell music that you don't even like, as an artist, but you're just doing it for that. Most real artists wouldn't do that.
It happens.
So
it happens every day though. Yeah.
Jimmy.
Yes. Okay, this is my next question, which is, and one of my favorite bands growing up. I was born in '74, so I'm a little younger or older than you. And I grew up in sort of like the era of Guns N' Roses and Metallica, Black, and all that. So at the time, I'm like, well, what other bands could I listen to? One of them was Wasp. Okay, Wasp sort of like gets thrown out there. Blackie Lawless is one of the best singers of all time, I think, in terms of his voice and the rock and the presence, the viciousness of it. It's just so intense. So I was looking through his liner notes once and on the Headless Children album, and he credited, I remember this growing up, and it was he credited vodka as being one of the things that kind of influenced that record in terms of bringing out the whatever lyrics and the riffs and everything and getting it all to gel together. How does that work with the Sword or you personally in terms of when you're trying to develop a concept or something? Does whiskey ever come out as one of those spirits that will inspire you to create and come up with some ideas? I mean, is it something that you can honestly say that has occurred?
It can. There's a window, of course, when it goes from helping to hurting. But I can only speak for myself creatively. When I'm working, when I have an idea that it's a fully fleshed out idea and it's time to create it, I don't imbibe right now, which is why I'm not drinking right now. I've got some serious work that I have to do after we get off this phone call. But when it comes time to get inspired for that, yes, I find that most of my great ideas, or I won't call them great, most of my ideas, my silly ideas that make me laugh, happen when I'm sitting at the bar at the pub, and just mulling over a shot of whiskey and a beer. And it's I can't speak to the validity of this, but what I was told, what I read, was that the reason that they're called spirits is because they bring out in you whatever ancestral kind of spirit is inside of you, and that's a way to connect to your past, and to sort of so if they're a mean whiskey drunk, well, maybe somebody in their past was a really mean drunk, and that's just kind of that person coming out in them, and so that's kind of why they were called spirits. And so I feel like maybe in my past there was probably somebody that had some great ideas too, and stuff. So whenever I just kind of sit around and sip and just kind of like open my mind and let the ideas flow, and don't be afraid of what comes and stuff like that, that's when it can help. But yeah, after 3 or 4 shots, you're not working anymore,
Yeah.
you're partying. And you better, if you do get an idea, you better have your notepad right there. Or I like just getting on Twitter. Honestly, I like getting drunk and getting on Twitter and just like firing off every stupid thing that comes into my brain, and then waking up the next day and be like, oh, good Lord, what was I thinking? But then every once in a while, there's like a really good idea in there that I'm like, oh, I'm glad I did that, because now it's one thing to like write it all on notepads, but I like making it public just because, number one, I think it shows people that I don't really take myself too seriously, but also that I don't know, it's I like engaging fans. I've always kind of resented the whole the wall between fans and the artists, like we wouldn't be who we are without the fans. We should be more welcoming and open to hearing what they had to say, which can go both ways sometimes. But not every artist is like that. A lot of artists are really introverted and don't want to talk to people in general. It doesn't matter if they're fans or not, they just don't want to talk to anybody, and I get that. But I'm a very personable person. I like people. I like talking to people. That was what I missed the most about touring, is I would, after the show, go to the bar and drink with everyone that came out there all night, and just like tell stupid stories and hear different points of view. And that, I feel like that inspired me more than just the drink itself, just like just having a communal drink with somebody, and then commiserating over whatever was going on in the world. And I would get a lot of inspiration about that, whether it was in Barcelona or Tokyo or wherever. There's people have a lot more in common than we don't. And that was something I missed the most about touring, was just sharing a drink with like-minded people.
I think one of the misconceptions a lot of people do have then about the musical creation process in rock and roll would be that, you're all just sitting around getting blasted and wasted all the time and just writing and playing the lyrics, and then it's done. I mean, I honestly know that I've had people come up to me and say, well, this stuff, that's how it's written and that's how it's made. Well, that's not, from what you just said. Basically, it's work. I mean, you actually have to practice, and you have to spend hours upon countless hours getting this stuff done. And the inspiration, like you say, may come from being out at a party or at a club or after a show and talking to people and all that, and the lyrics and ideas come from that. But the actual process of writing and doing a record and laying tracks down and all that, that's actually something you actually have to pay attention to. Is that basically kind of what I got out of what you're coming from there, or did I misinterpret that? I don't know.
For me personally, yes.
Yeah.
No, yeah. For me personally, definitely. I can't speak for every single artist
I'm
out
not
there,
talking
but
about I'm saying,
yeah,
what,
getting all your ducks in a row, and having the workload in front of you, and knowing what to accomplish is, yeah. Once you dive into that, I find that imbibing kind of slows that process down. And but sometimes it helps though. Like if you hit you hit a roadblock, like let's say you're like, it's time to do a guitar solo, and you're just not, it's not happening, you're not feeling it, your timing's off, you're like 6 takes deep, and you're like just kind of getting frustrated, crack a beer, you know what I mean? Just chill out a little bit, not that it doesn't shouldn't do that too often. I shouldn't. I should say I shouldn't do that too often, just because after one beer you want two, you want three, you want five, and then you're not working anymore. But there are times when it's okay, especially during the mixing process. Sometimes I feel like if you've been listening to the kick drum for like 3 hours and you're just like, okay, I need to get out of here. Yeah, just go somewhere, have a pint, have a shot, whatever, come back with just like a fresh perspective, a little bit softer soul, and then it'll be a
No,
much more
that's kind of
natural
what I learned
process
with writer's
if
block.
somebody else is riding the controls.
Yeah, like a writer's block, or if you have a just a block and what you're doing creatively, that can definitely help. So
Something at the Whiskey Network
we would smoke a ton of
lot.
weed too, like, so yeah, I don't know if we're allowed to talk about pot, but I mean, the Sword, we were, even though
talk about whatever you want,
like being called a stoner metal band, yeah, we still smoked more weed than fucking anybody. But so that was always kind of like the constant. Like, we might not have been drinking or anything like that, but there was definitely a lot of joints going around, and so that kind of helped us all focus on what was important. And then the alcohol for me was like after a job well done. That's I use it for more of like the reward these days, reward incentive. When I was younger, it was just like a kind of a constant all day thing. But yeah, these days I try to be slightly more mature about it.
Okay, so I want to grab onto that, and that's, you made a really interesting point to me. One of the things that we talk about at the Whiskey Network is that whiskey and stories are intertwined. This is something that is very important. Whiskey by itself, whatever, you could have one shot, you could have 10 shots, you're by yourself, but it's the stories that get attached to it. It's the special occasions. It's, you, and I want to get to this, is you celebrating a job well done. I've had conversations with other folks and talked about other things where it's like, hey, I did this really amazing thing, and somebody had a bottle of the terriblest whiskey that you could possibly ever find. And in the moment when I did that good job and I tasted that whiskey, it tasted like the best whiskey on the planet. Because of the job well done, because of that whole sort of experience. I mean, is that where you're coming from with that?
You can. I mean, if I'm sitting around by myself and I'm going to celebrate a job well done, I'm probably going to buy a bottle of like 12-year Kinahans or something. But if it's just a communal thing, like at the bar after the show, job well done, you just want just a beer and a shot, kind of like, and somebody wants to buy you a drink, and you don't even question what it is, you know what I mean? You just kind of just do that shot of Jameson or whatever, Bushmills or whatever it is. I don't really hem and haw whenever somebody's buying me a drink.
Sure.
It can be very nice. It doesn't even have to be brand specific. Like I said, just like whatever it is, it's just the nature of the generosity of someone wanting to show their appreciation by putting some whiskey in your mouth. Whenever I did my solo band went out last summer on a tour supporting Electric Six, and it was, the Sword, we had a sizable guarantee, a nice tour rider. We have basically anything we wanted within reason. We were modest with our demands, but going back to like just first act on the tour, solo album, first tour ever with the solo band, we were back to making $200 a night with getting our 2 drink tickets, and that was it. So on stage, on the microphone, I would always say like, yeah, I'm raising these boys all by myself. If anybody could find it in their cold dead pocketbooks to put some whiskey on this stage, I'd really appreciate it. So I was literally just asking for whiskey, and usually every night, I don't think there was a single night that at least 4 shots didn't come up to the stage. And those were always really special, because it was just like, I know that person just probably went and spent $30 on something, and it was always really nice of them to do that for us. But I don't know. I probably should have asked for the money instead of the whiskey. I don't know.
No, whiskey is meant to be shared. Whiskey is meant to be shared. Right? Come on.
It's true. There was one night though, in Portland, Oregon. I said that there was probably like 500 people at the show, and I said that on the stage, and like trays of shots started arriving on the stage. I mean, cocktails on napkins started. Like, people just, it was out of control. I looked down on the floor, and there was probably like 50 shots of whiskey, just like all over the place. I didn't know what to do. I was like, oh wow, oops. So I just reached down and grabbed one, and I told the whole front row, I was like, you're all 21, right? Just everybody grab a shot. We're all doing this right now. And just kind of, I don't know. know they were all meant for us. But I was like, if we all drink all this whiskey, there's no way this show is going to happen. So that was a funny night.
See,
I had to
now
wash my mouth sometimes, you know.
that's the kind of story that I'm talking about right there. That to me is a proper whiskey experience story out there of the room coming together and just serving it up for you guys like that. That's absolutely perfect.
Yeah.
Let's delve a little deeper into music, because you talked about they're called spirits and they bring something out of you, and that kind of falls in line with the question that I had is, when did you realize that you had talent above and beyond? I mean, there's a lot of people that kind of take on the guitar. There's a lot of people that like, think that they can get into music. When did it occur to you that you had something special?
I still don't know that I do, but everyone tells me I do. I don't know. This is kind of a two-part answer, I guess. Like, number one, I don't think I'm the best guitar player in the world, not even close to it. There's plumbers out there that no one will ever know their name that are way sicker than I am. I just had this ability. I use my brain as an antenna to like listen to the universe, and it just everything. I truly believe that everything that's already been written or ever will be written or anything, it's already out there in the universe, and it's up to our brains, are these little electrical antennas that can pick up that stuff out of the ether. And I just have the ability to hear music and then make the guitar make the noise that I hear in my head. And that's what I think is kind of the difference between somebody that can play guitar very well and an artist. And so I never set out to be the best guitar player in the world or anything like that. But there was one summer, I would say the Sword had been a band for a while. I mean, like I was really young whenever we started. I started the band. Let's see, I was 20 years old. And that would have been in 2003. And even like the rest of the band members were much older, and not, I mean, relatively at the time. We're not all that much older than each other now. That we're almost all in our 40s. But there must have been something that they saw in me being much younger than they were to ask me to come into that circle of musicians. I can't say what it was. I think maybe it was my enthusiasm, or paired with my ability at the time. But I didn't really like shred like crazy in those early years. I mean, I mangled all those riffs up and just like played a couple of solos here and there. But I didn't really start taking lead guitar seriously until we made our second album. And then I just kind of started hearing more. I was like, I want to play the crazier solos. And then you go on like a world tour with Metallica, and you just try to, you stand 10 feet away from Kirk Hammett every night. Yeah, you're going to want to do some crazier stuff. And I eventually just like started hearing more kind of really wild solos in my head, and I took the time to sit down with my guitar and figure out how to do all that. I did a lot of LSD one summer and literally just like hung out in my apartment with my guitar and just I was like, I'm gonna get to the bottom of this. And I think that really helped me open my brain up more and like hear more, and we made a lot of money on that tour, so I could afford to take some time off and just sit there with my guitar and get better at my craft and dive in more and more and more. And so I think whenever we made Warp Riders, which was our third album, that would have been in 2010. I remember hearing that after it was done and then thinking to myself, like, wow, I've really upped my game and I'm doing stuff that is on par with the greats, and so that probably around the Warp Riders era is when I realized that I was better than your average doom metal guitar player.
Well, you became the face of doom metal in that, and sometimes it's not always.
Did I?
I think so. That's that seems to be a pretty consistent theme that folks talk about. That the Sword is a bit. The Sword is one of the bands that definitely came up out of that group of bands, whatever you want to call them. Genre. That sort of sound that came out. You guys may not have started it, but you put it on the map, and that was different.
That's true. Yeah, and we did bury a lot of terrible styles of music. Like back when we first started, every local band that would open up for us was like a really intense death metal band or like a new metal kind of thing or whatever. And we buried that. I mean, you can't go anywhere now without the local band being some sort of kind of groovy Sabbath inspired kind of doom metal sounding band. So right. I don't have any problem taking credit for burying new metal.
Yep, and I'm okay with that. I think if you did a straw poll of influences for musicians, the two most popular things that you'd hear would be either the Beatles or Zeppelin. I don't know if you were influenced by either one of those bands, but what were some of the influences that you had that may have been a little off the reservation?
Yeah, I mean, like, all the greats. When people ask that question a lot, they're like, what are your musical influences? And they just, I don't know. You can either say, look, Slayer, Metallica, Black Sabbath, Thin Lizzy. Like, is that what
Yeah,
you
but
want to hear?
everybody's influenced by that.
But if you, like you say, like, oh, I know that, but it's like, sometimes I swear that that's all they want to hear is you just confirm that you listened to Slayer once.
No, I want to hear
as far as
what's
like
off
the
the
stuff
books.
off the beaten path, Yeah, as far as the sword is concerned, or just myself personally, like
You
early on
personally.
before
You personally.
all that. Yeah, growing up, especially in high school, I was in all kinds of stuff. I grew up watching MTV, and I think I found MTV in '93 or like early '94, and they played everything. They played everything from like Dr. Dre to Nirvana to Southern Culture on the Skids to B-52s and just Morbid Angel. They played everything, every kind of music imaginable. They played it all the time, 24 hours a day. I was glued to it. It was my lifeline to like what was important. So I was into everything. I loved Nirvana. I loved Prince. I loved The Cure. I loved the Aerosmith. There's too many to name. I was a huge Nine Inch Nails fan. So it'd be basically just like anything and everything from that era, I just devoured and was totally all about. I will say that it didn't do me many favors because growing up in the 90s and being into all that kind of music, it was absolutely not cool to play guitar solos. So I never really cared about playing guitar solos for like a long time. And so like I said, like, I think that kind of did me a disservice, unfortunately, but I caught up. It was fine.
Yeah, no,
But
we're glad that you caught up for
Sword
sure.
first got together, yeah, right. Yeah. Whenever the Sword got together, we were collectively, we were all real into like Sleep, the Melvins, a band called Carp, with a K. If y'all don't remember them, they eventually evolved into a band called Big Business. But yeah, Carp was incredible. There's a band called the Lord Weird Slough-Egg that was from San Francisco.
I haven't heard of that one.
They made an album called Traveler. That was an album based on a D&D game about space travel that was just phenomenal. We loved that. Yeah. They sort of became a band called Hammers of Misfortune. That their first album, The Bastard, was a huge influence on the Sword back in the day. Bands like the Fucking Champs, a lot of Bay Area stuff. Like obviously Metallica, the Fucking Champs, Slough-Egg, all that stuff was from the Bay Area, and that was a huge influence on us back in the day. There was a band called Saviors that we used to tour with a lot back then. That we were more like contemporaries, but they were still a huge influence on us. We loved their band. So
talking about Prince, just grabbing onto that name, where do you think Prince ranks in the great list of guitar players? Where do you think he's at?
Number one. Nobody's better. Nobody could play guitar like that. Nobody could do anything like he could. I'm not saying. I mean, it was very. Jimmy was good, but he only had 3 records and then he died.
True.
Sorry, you know what I mean. And also, like, Axis Bold as Love, is one of my favorite albums of all time, but you can't put that up against every Prince record. I mean, if Jimmy had lived, that might be another story, but
sure.
I honestly, I'm not a big fan of the Band of Gypsies and that like Machine Gun and all that stuff after that. Doesn't really do it for me. I like the experience. It definitely had a weird groove to it you could say it's a lot like Prince. You're like 2 English white dudes laying down this crazy, funky yet kind of straight rhythm section. They were more like had like a jazz groove to them. I wouldn't say they were like super like when Sabbath eventually came around, they didn't have that kind of groove. It was a different kind of jazzy kind of pop funk that Jimi Hendrix had, that Prince kind of had too. He had that real straight funk, he made drum machines funky. You know what I mean? Which is like a computer. So like he was able to make a computer funky. It was but it still had this kind of straightness to it. That was like a lot of push and pull and stuff like that. It's not easy to emulate that kind of guitar playing. He played with a lot of compression and a lot of EQ thrown on top of what he was doing, and probably some attenuation in there somewhere because like his solos would be so overdriven yet really tightly controlled. And yeah, he was a good guitar player. He was so good. He was so little. He was 5'3", and he played these. His cloud guitar was actually a short scale guitar. It was 24 3/4 instead of 25 3/4, which was just a little bit shorter than your average guitar. But he also played tellies and those Vox guitars and stuff like that. So he did play full size guitars as well. He was the greatest. I
Did you
never
ever
got to
meet him?
see him. I never got to see him. I never got to meet him. I'm okay with that. I've met a lot of my heroes, and I've got good stories and bad stories. But I'm okay with never having seen Prince or met him or anything like that, just because I think I've seen so much and done so much in my life. I'm a really fortunate person, but I think that you should always have that like unattainable thing, to kind of keep yourself just sort of in perspective or still have that thing that you think is magical, that still creates like that sense of wonder in you instead of like being some bitter old jaded dude. I just love hearing people's stories about him, because there was this band called Grupo Fantasma that was his backing band for a little while. They were from Austin. We were really good friends with them. They were kind of like this Latin orchestra that he played with Prince for a while, and they were out with Prince at the same time that we were out with Metallica. So they were a bunch of like Mexican dudes that wanted to hear our Metallica stories, and we were a bunch of white boys that wanted to hear their Prince stories. So we had a lot in common. We commiserated over that quite a bit, and yeah, that was about as close as I got to Prince. The guy that Adrian Casada that produced the Sword's High Country album, he was the guitar player for Grupo Fantasma whenever they were out with Prince. And so whenever we made High Country, I told him, I was like, I want this to be our sign of the times. I want it to be like lots of different kinds of songs, all different sounding, but all mashed together into one like double disc, comprehensive thing. And so Prince was a huge influence on how I viewed creating records.
That's awesome. I never had heard that before. That's incredible. Huh. So, talking about sort of meeting your heroes, talking about being on tour, you've mentioned playing 150 rooms. You've mentioned playing big, huge arenas. Do you prefer playing either one or one or the other?
It depends. There's positives and negatives about both of them. I mean, it just depends on the sound. I've played terrible sounding clubs and I've played terrible sounding arenas, but I've also played great sounding clubs and great sounding outdoor festivals where there's 40,000 people watching you and it sounds incredible. And there's nothing like that. I promise you. But I really do enjoy playing like a 200-300 seater club and the front row is just right in your face before smartphones. There's nothing I hate more than when everybody's got their phone out or videoing you. I get it. If you want to take your picture, put your phone away. But when you just sit there.
Mark.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I get over it. I'll even give you one song. If you just have to do it, do a song, get it out of your system, but put your phone away. If you're doing it every single song, then you're watching the whole show through your phone, and then the people behind you are like staring at your phone, and then everybody put your phone down. I mean, I've definitely lost it a couple of times where I like kicked the phone out of somebody's hand just because I'm sick of having a fucking camera in my face. And that's that might have been the whiskey kicking, but it's just, I don't know, I'm trying to play a show here. Get your fucking camera out of my face.
Yeah,
if people want to get uppity about it, be like, I paid good money to be here, I'll tape what I want. It's like, well, then I'll kick your fucking phone, and then that's just then we're gonna agree to disagree, and you're gonna have a broken phone. I'm sorry, but that's just what happens when you put a camera in my face. It's not a threat. It's just fucking happens. It takes a lot of self-restraint. I don't know. I just remember we toured before smartphones ever existed, and I do miss those days when people would just kind of like come to the show because it was the one thing to do. And now when you're playing the show and you're killing it, and you look down and somebody in the front row is just checking their email, and you're just like, are you fucking serious, dude? Like, I don't know. They're just like, go to the back with it. I don't care. Do your thing. If you have to look at your phone, that's fine, but get out of the front row.
I'm with you there.
Get off my soapbox. Sorry.
I was just going to throw in is that I can just imagine like back in the day of punk with a band like X or the really great Axe, and everybody sitting there with a cell phone trying to do. Yeah, it really wouldn't have worked.
No, there's a band called one of my favorite bands when I was growing up, Blue Meanies. They're from Chicago. They got the ska label thrown at them, but they were this ridiculous like jazz metal freak out band. They were great, but they broke up in 2001, and then they recently, I think 2016 or 2017, they got back together for Riot Fest to do a handful of reunion shows. And I was talking to their singer, and he was like, "Yeah, we hadn't played a show since 2001, and so like the second we hit the first note in 2016 at our first show back, like 500 phones up. They're like, we just didn't. I didn't expect that. I'd never seen that before. I didn't know how to feel, or whatever. It was like, it was definitely weird, And so it's like, yeah, I wish people put their phones down, but whatever. Part of
Jimmy, I know.
modern society. Yeah.
Jimmy, I know you got a couple of questions here.
Yeah, just to follow up on it with like technology, and you were discussing. I'll just start with this one. Would be like the things that have really changed since I was a kid. I mean, when I started was tape, okay, but now everybody's going to vinyl. A lot of people are trying to get back into tubes and vinyl and recording and all that, and kind of trying to get a nice tone going, whereas opposed to the MP3, get it down to as freaking little bit as possible so you can put as many songs on there as on your shuffle that you can get. Do you think that where do you fall? I'm sure I know, but where do you fall on the side of that? Is it more I'm sure it's more in the purist side, but maybe not. I mean, where do you think in terms of musical technology and how that has affected rock and since you got into it till now?
Yeah. When I was coming up, it was all CDs, and I didn't really start collecting vinyl until I moved to Austin in 2000, when there was actual record stores. Where I grew up, there was no record stores, and stuff like that. And then I'm digging through, even back then, you could dig through the dollar bin and get every Police record for $1. Vinyl was really kind of out back in those days. I want to say around 2010, it probably like really took a sharp incline back up, but that was also after like people had just sort of binged on MP3s and heard the sound quality go down with that, and so look, it depends. It's like everything else, just like whiskey, you know what I mean? There's really nice sippers, there's shooters and stuff like that. So there's sometimes you want to get that record that you really want to hear on vinyl and just hear that depth and that richness that like those kinds of stereo recordings have to offer through a really nice stereo system. Sometimes you're driving around all day and you just need a bunch of songs on your shuffle, and it's out of convenience you use your streaming app or whatever like that. I don't really, every situation is different, but one thing that I do think it has affected is, okay, so let's say you buy a Sword CD for $10 and you listen to it, or a record for $20 or whatever, and you listen to it 1,000 times. We only ever got that $120 or whatever, and that's fine. But so then if you go and like listen to the Sword on Spotify, we'll get a few extra pennies for that over time. And if everyone just did both, they bought the record and listened to it on the streaming app, that would be better for everyone, because you would have the convenience of having it wherever, and you would also own the thing. But when people just replaced buying records with going with the streaming apps and everything like that, one thing that I noticed that it did to like really popular music, not just rock and roll at all, I wouldn't say it affected rock and roll much, but it as far as the current state of pop or hip hop or country or whatever like that, is that whenever you take an MP3, say you take a nice big fat wave file and you squash it down to an MP3, you're losing tons of frequencies. There's lots of frequencies that are just going out the door that you're not going to hear anymore from that original recording, but there are a lot of frequencies left. And so what people are doing is they're taking those frequencies that come through in an MP3, and they're shaping their waves to react really well in an MP3 format. And there's only so many frequencies, and there's so many sounds that sound that good. So the reason that a lot of stuff is all sounding the same these days is because they're mastering it and mixing it to be dumped down into that MP3 format. So for every band out there that takes the time to go that more purist route or whatever, there's 100 or more bands that are just going straight for the jugular for that MP3 kind of like sound quality stuff. And so I think that's why there's not as much diversity in popular music these days is just because it's all being really limited to what you can do in a sound frequency spectrum as it pertains to recording music, if that
No,
makes any sense.
I just know, like a bunch of the 80s stuff that I do listen to frequently and metal and everything. If I burn it on a CD and then listen to it on a FLAC uncompressed, as opposed to an MP3, I
Yeah.
can definitely hear the difference, even
Oh yeah,
through
for
headphones.
sure.
So
Mhm.
yeah, I mean, when I'm working out or whatever, but yeah, I mean, everybody's different. I mean, I like you say, it's like the average consumer, do they even care? Probably not, obviously not. But, to people that really love music, I think
Totally.
it does matter,
Yeah.
and but we don't drive it. It's just like in whiskey, like you were saying, the social versus the solitary, and the purist versus the connoisseur and all that. That it's sort of
Yeah.
like the eternal argument. And who's going to drive it at the end of the day is the almighty dollar, and who's going to, get through. But unfortunately,
Yep.
that's just the way it is. But yeah, I was interested to get your opinion on that. The other thing would be basically, I mean, this kind of goes, you were saying with MTV. How do you think MTV during that time when you were coming up, when Warp Riders and back in 2010 and all that sort of, even before that, in your first couple records, what do you think MTV during that time frame? How did that affect rock and roll in terms of its development? Because back when I was growing up, they had the Headbangers Ball and all that, and we all lived for that on Friday and Saturday nights, and there was still metal pretty frequently on MTV. And then there was the
Yeah.
Nirvana thing and everything. So what do you think MTV had to, I mean, was there any kind of correlation between that and rock and roll and its development and how that all played out in your opinion, or no?
Absolutely. And it was very constant. It was a conscious effort on their part to bring certain styles of music about. Whenever the Swords started, our first record came out in 2006, and we were like the last band that ever got any MTV play. We had 2 videos that MTV actually played on their Headbangers Ball program that were on regular rotation. And we got quite a bit of reaction out of that, but it was shortly after that they just stopped playing videos altogether. And but I mean, even in the late 90s, um, MTV wanted rock and roll to be big again, so they started asking all the labels to send them all their current rock acts, and that's how bands like Kid Rock and Korn and Blink 182 and stuff like that, they started to get heavy airplay because MTV wanted rock and roll to be big. Literally, they asked for these videos, and the labels complied and gave them the videos, and this MTV consciously started playing Korn round the clock, which is, I'm not saying they don't deserve it or whatever, but I'm just saying that it has a huge part of their success attached to it. Is just that, you couldn't turn on MTV without seeing the Freak on a Leash video. It was just everywhere, and it was very concentrated effort on their part. And whenever they stopped making money playing videos, they started making reality shows. Whenever they stopped making money with reality shows, they started playing Tyra Banks supermodel marathons all day. And it's just that MTV and Viacom, they just kind of became this company that would just, they're just chasing the money just like any other company. They didn't really give a fuck about music back in the day. They just knew they could make a buck at it. So sorry.
Just to follow on, you were talking about like New Orleans is one of my favorite cities.
Me too.
Ever. Me and my wife and son, we absolutely love the city. We love the musical, the artistic vibe that goes on there.
Oh, yeah.
It's truly legitimate. It's a jazz city. The live artists, the street performers, all that is truly legit. And every time I go there and I see these artists doing this and doing it purely for the love, because they're not getting rich doing it. So at least most 99% of them are. I mean, there's only so many trombone shorties and Winston Marsalis's of the world and Harry Connick Jr.'s.
Yeah.
Most of the ones that we love are truly jazz aficionados and people who just love live music and seeing it performed with soul and passion. And I'm just wondering, what do you think of the current state? It made me think. It's just, what is the current state of the rock guy that getting off a bus in LA like Axl Rose used to sing about and saying, "Oh, I'm going to make it big," and all. I mean, how hard is it today for somebody to just pick up a guitar and do this for a living full time? Just to give us some perspective.
It's impossible.
It's
It's impossible.
In a word,
You either have to be rich already, and if you're already rich, then it's fine. You can afford to just play guitar forever, and it doesn't matter if nobody shows up. Some people are like Billie Eilish, just right out the gates. They're going to be 19 years old and just become the biggest thing in the world, and that's great. I more power to them. But what I question is, what is the motivation for someone to want to pick up a guitar these days and do that? Because there's certainly no money in it anymore. That's been a widely publicized fact. There's small chance for fame, but the chances of somebody, let's just say, like, you can get famous, you can get a certain degree of fame, whatever that means to you. But there are people out there that can get way more famous than you by listening to your music than you can for actually creating your music. Like critics and things like that can actually get way more famous than you as the creator, which is weird. Even your fans, sometimes fans can just make a blog about how much they love your band, and all of a sudden like 100,000 people follow that, and you've got like 10,000 followers, and you're like, well, I'm the actual
you're
person.
the artist.
And then yeah, right. And then the whole, the sex, drugs, and rock and roll thing, the allure of that coming out of the 80s and 90s and stuff, like the drugs, or most of them are legal now. And so that's, the mystique there is kind of gone, because you can just go to a store and buy weed or whatever. It's just, which is weird to think about. And then the sex thing is like, obviously a really touchy political subject now with, that whole climate with the Me Too movement and everything, which I am full support of. But it just, it's definitely like not as much of a debaucherous scene as it used to be. And then so after all that is being said, like the kind of people that wanted to be musicians and stuff in these past times were a different kind of person. So I just wonder, I question like what kind of people would be motivated to even pick up a guitar and want to do that for a living these days. I don't know. You'd have to really, really care about the music, which is awesome. But I just don't know. I'm curious as to see what I'm most curious about is to see what comes next, because everything's been done. You just really think that like everything's been done, and every new genre that comes up is just a mix of two other genres that go together, and then this and that or whatever. But surely there has to be some sound that has never been explored before. And I'm excited to see the group of people that decide to tackle that sound and to wrestle that sound out of the stone. Try to bleed that stone just a little bit more.
A little more blood from the stone.
Yeah. Let me ask you, just a follow up. Do you think it's something that's going to come out of the current musical instrument scene, or is it something that has to be totally different that hasn't been heard before?
I don't know. Yeah, that's a good point. There's a what's that movie? Oh crap. Is it Hereditary?
Heredity, yeah.
Yeah, Heredity. I think the person that did the soundtrack for that movie actually invented their own instrument.
Right.
I think it was called like the suspense machine or something like that. But they literally like got with a luthier and like I need an instrument that'll like make these crazy sounds and do this and that or whatever. I mean, I wouldn't call it a musical sounds by any means, but for a machine that creates really suspenseful tones and stuff like that while you're scoring the soundtrack for a scary movie, I thought that was really cool. It had like metal plates sticking out of it that you could like kind of wipe the side of, and like the pickups would feedback whenever they would do that. I'm butchering the description of this instrument, but it was really, really cool. And I that was one of the new instruments that I've seen be invented that I thought was implemented in a way that was really, really effective.
Cool. Throw it back to Mark.
Yeah. So, Kyle, I want to say thank you. I appreciate the time. I think
Absolutely.
the Whiskey Network audience is going to be thrilled to hear and to read about all of this stuff. Before we jump into the final set of questions here that we'll go through kind of rapid fire, I just want to make sure, what's the upcoming projects? I know we touched a little bit on Sword getting back together, and touring a little bit. You personally, what projects do you have going on at the moment?
Yeah, the swords, all of our tour dates with Primus and everything are still slated for next summer. So July, August, September. Hopefully those will all still happen. Fingers crossed. I recently had a book project get funded through Kickstarter, which is called Written in Stoned. So I'm gonna kind of dish on my story about what it was like coming up from literally nothing with no money, moving to Austin with the intention of becoming a worldwide guitar player, which I did. And so I've had some really ridiculous adventures that I'm going to put into that book. I would like to write more, but I think for the first book, I kind of have to tell my story so people care about anything else I have to say. But I've been painting a lot. My solo album that came out a year ago, or 2 years ago at this point. Sorry, this has been a weird year. I feel like time froze for everyone. But the cover of it is just a velvet painting of my face, and so I've been taking oil paints and just painting like little parodies of myself over it, for whatever anyone wanted. Like if you want me to paint myself as RoboCop, or Batman, or pretty much anything, C-3PO. I'll do it. So just hit me up on my Instagram at Kyle Shutt. But that's it. And I've got a ton of on my YouTube channel, my Bandcamp page. I've got tons of cover songs that I always put out for free to download. So I know people are hard up these days for entertainment, and I do have my original stuff. I do ask for a modest amount for, but my cover songs, I just put them out there for free. So if you want to hear me do some Blue Oyster Cult or Cheap Trick or Concrete Blonde or the Cramps or Ramones, or I've got you covered. And I also take requests too. So you never know what I'm going to say yes to. So hop on YouTube, check out my cover songs, and drop a request in the comments, and you'd be surprised. I might actually do it. So yeah.
It used to be that people wanted a Velvet Elvis. Now people want a Velvet Kyle.
They do. They really do.
All right. So to all of our distinguished guests that we interview, we have a special section, and it's called the Mash Bill. The Whiskey Network wants to know your recipe. These are 5 of the most common questions that get asked, and it's just right off the top of your head, okay. Whatever your answers are. So here we go. First question: what was the last whiskey, bourbon, or scotch that was in your glass?
Oh God, you're gonna hate me, old granddad.
I'm not gonna hate you. Respect. That's great. I love it.
Before that, it would have been Stranahan's probably. Yeah, but there's went to an establishment down the street, and I had been gone for a while, and they were happy to see me back, and they had poured a shot of Old Granddad for me. So that was the last one that I had.
Respect. Do you prefer to drink your whiskey in a specific type of glass?
No.
I'm good with that. Do you have a unicorn bottle that you haven't been able to find?
Not really. Because Austin's pretty fortunate. You can kind of get anything you want here, alcohol wise. I'm also very fortunate that I have connections kind of all over the world, that if something does come up, I can usually hit up a friend and they can mail me a bottle, even though it's illegal to do in Texas. Sometimes they don't check those boxes.
Allegedly, you're not doing that.
Yeah. Allegedly, I'm not. I never did that. Never once did I ever do that. But I'm trying to think if there's ones that are. No, I mean I've never. You can get it anywhere. I've never had Nikka, the Japanese whiskey. I know I could probably go buy it, but I don't know. I've never had it. I wouldn't say it's my unicorn bottle, but if I saw it at a bar, I might order it. Okay, yeah, give it to you. Well, it's just because Japanese people, they do things so well that I thought that maybe they could take the whiskey game and really ramp it up a notch or two or whatever. But I'll take your word for it.
Real quick, I just want to. Do you know Itzhak Perlman, the violinist?
Uh-huh.
He once was teaching a group of Chinese artists to play the violin, and he told them, he said, "You all play absolutely perfectly musically, but you sound absolutely terrible." Meaning that you had the notes, you could play the notes, but there was no artistry or passion or anything behind it. I'm not saying
Hmm.
that's what Japanese whiskey is, but Japanese whiskey is very, very. It's perfect. It's almost too perfect. It doesn't have any kind of
Yeah.
rawness to it that you kind of associate with a really, it's got to have something, to it, and to warrant the prices that
Uh-huh.
those things command. If they were reasonably priced, I wouldn't be complaining. But if
Yeah.
you're going to have $500 for a Yamazaki 18-year-old whiskey, then it better blow my freaking socks off. You know what I mean? So that's all I'm saying.
Yeah. Okay. I'll take your word for that. Yeah. Yeah.
Kyle,
One time
the
I will
rock.
say that one of there was a there was a kind of a unicorn bottle. I guess it doesn't exist. You would have to make it. But whenever the Sword did our first beer with Real Ale Brewing Company, it was an English style IPA, and they took some of the wort and they distilled it into a whiskey, and it was the only time that I've ever tasted a hoppy whiskey. It was phenomenal. It was absolutely just
Right.
super smooth, caramelly. It was great, and yeah, I've yet to taste anything like that since. So I guess maybe that could be your answer for that one.
Well, I was going to say the rock and roll answer is going to be no. You've got everything that you ever wanted, but I think I am going to make it the answer of the unattainable Sword whiskey that was made from the wort of your beer. That's a much better answer. Okay, hypothetical. I'm looking for a gift for a friend. My budget is somewhere between $50 and $75. What bottle do you recommend?
Old Rippy. Get him a nice $3.75 bottle of Old Rippy. That would be, I would say that's a nice, like, it's not like a huge bottle. It's a little bit smaller, compact. I don't know, it just seems like it's a little more special to me. I don't know. That would mostly, I just wish people would buy that for me. So that's what. That's my answer.
Acceptable answer.
But,
okay, finally.
Yeah, you know what I did like the it's a little more generic, I know, but the Jameson Caskmates, they did one that was like from like stout barrels or whatever.
Yep.
I thought that one was really nice. I didn't like the IPA one as much, but speaking of hoppy whiskeys or whatever, but yeah, I did enjoy the stout one.
They did a coffee one as well, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh wow!
All right, last question. What is your favorite toast?
They're all pretty crude.
It's all right.
I don't know, but it wasn't my toast, but I was drinking with a bunch of Englishmen one night. Am I really gonna say this? But there was this one guy. The British, they're a boisterous bunch, and we were all had shot. I was in Honduras, but I was hanging out in an island in Honduras called Utila that a bunch of English people had visited, and we were at a bar. The only whiskey they had on the island was Jack Daniels. So we were all doing shots of Jack, and then one of them there's toast, 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 and looked at their friend, who I guess was the toast master, and he just put his glass up in the air and he goes, "Up the bum, no babies."
Oh God!
I know. It's so crass. I know, but at the time it was probably the most perfect thing anybody could have said, and yeah, I think of that often. I would never myself attempt that. I'm not that I don't know, clever is not the word, charming, I guess, but yeah, it's
what I find more funny than anything is that you were sitting there doing shots of Jack with a bunch of British people.
Yeah, I think that's the real story there. That's the crass part of that story.
Yeah, right. Yeah. But
okay.
All the British have the best cheers. When you're cheersing a bunch of pints of beer, so everybody goes, "Cheers, big ears." I like that one. But yeah.
So that is the last question that I had. I want to thank you for taking the time. I'm going to have Tasha stop the recording. If you want to hang for a few minutes, we can chit chat for just a minute if you like, and then we will let you go on your way.
Yeah, sounds great. Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. I really do.